very much, Carlos, for joining me on the podcast today. It's great to speak to you and have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me here, Rob. It's a real pleasure.
So, lots of places we could start this conversation, and there's loads of topics that I want to get into and get to at some point during this interview. But always like to start with the origin story of the guest and try and dig a bit into the background of how you've got to the place where you are now and what you're working on today. So I thought a good place to start would be in Western Sahara. Maybe not the most obvious place for us to start our conversation, but where is Western Sahara for those people that don't already know who are listening? And what does that country, what link does that country have to your origin story?
Yeah, so Western Sahara is a country, it's the south of Morocco in Africa, and it's literally in front of the Canary Islands, and that's where I'm from originally. I'm from Gran Canaria. And when I studied there in Gran Canaria, I had a few friends who were from Western Sahara who actually were studying in Gran Canaria as well. And when we finished our studies, my friend asked me to go to Western Sahara with him, and I had never been before. And it's not a country or a place in the world that we have very top of mind in the Canaries, even if it's so close to us. But because politically we are Spanish, all of our connections are more with Spain and not so much with Africa and Western Sahara. But I say yes to my friend. I say, yeah, I go with you. Why not? So I jumped into this little plane, and it's just a 30-minute flight. It's like really short flight. You take like it's 2.5 hour flight to get to mainland Spain from the Canaries, just so you get an idea where things are in terms of distance. I got into this plane. It literally goes up and down. It doesn't stay up. So it's super short flight. And when I got there to Western Sahara, I saw a totally different reality to what I was used to see before. And, people living in poverty with really little opportunities in their life. I saw lots of people, with really no access to health, education, clean water, things like that. And that maybe, reflect a lot on everything that I had in the Canaries that people didn't have there. And up until that point, I had been thinking that, I got a degree and I got this, I got that, because I had put a lot of effort into, studying or doing this or whatever. But then I realized there was something more fundamental underlying all of that. And it's that I got those opportunities because I was born 30 minutes away from Western Sahara. And that really opened my eyes. And also the people in Western Sahara, they're really amazing. They have like really deep values in terms of family and friendship that we've kind of lost in the Canary Islands. So I was really looking up to them, the way they were treating me. It's a little bit cliche, but people who have really nothing, they share everything. And I really saw that back then. And up until that point, I was a very normal guy, just having dreams of, having a big house, having a big, BMW, an expensive car or something like that. And those were my dreams in life. Luckily, I've changed those. And I think that experience going to Western Sahara and realizing how close those people are from the Canaries and how different the opportunities were, I thought, I need to do something about this. I need to help people in the world. I need to help people have more opportunities. And, back then I started being super passionate about eradicating poverty and helping people with little access to opportunities and human development. So that trip really changed who I am. It took a little bit for that seed to develop, but it really made me start thinking, what can I do with my life to create more positive impact for others?
Yeah, so as you say, it planted a seed then back then, and then it feels like looking back at your profile and how you've got to where you are now and working on problems in climate change and sustainability. It feels like it's been always been there, that seed planted, as you say, back in Western Sahara, and it's been an interesting journey, I guess, to get to where you are now. So you're an engineer by training, I guess. But when I dug more into your into what you, even when you were working on engineering, the kind of things you were working on, you clearly always had this interest in community, in building networks of people, and building networks of people that want to make a difference or people that want to change things. So it may not, if you look at your CV and saw engineer and then working in climate change sustainability, it might not be an obvious jump, but to me, looking back through it, it's clear that you've always had that that interest in community and networking.
Yeah, and I think it all goes back for that point when I went to Western Sahara. That was just a few months before I came to the UK. And at that time, when I had finished my degree, I tried to find a job in Spain and I couldn't really find anything. So back there in Spain, I thought, okay, so if I cannot work, at least until I find a job, I'll try to do some volunteering, because I had already that seed in my head thing, well, I need to do something useful with my time, and that's probably helping others. So I remember that I went to Amnesty International, the charity, and I was about to join their group as a volunteer. But then I got a job in the UK. So I said to them, sorry, I really need to leave because I really cannot find a way to have a living, make a living here in Spain. So I couldn't get involved with Amnesty International at that point, and I came to the UK. That was in early 2015. So I started my job as a civil engineer here in the UK, and just after like 1 month or 2 months, I thought, okay, so I want to go back to this thing of I actually did another trip to Western Sahara, and that again was a good reminder of who I wanted to become. Because when I came to the UK first, I got my first job, my first salary. I was really excited, and I kind of went back a little bit to my previous me, thinking, I'm gonna party all day and spend my salary in, saving for a car and expensive stuff and just have a capitalist life, as I call it. But then in the summer, my best friend to the Sahara, he got married, and I went to the wedding there. And that really made me switch back again. It's like, hey, remember, I want to become a better person. I want to be somebody that, spends the energy and time and even money trying to help others. So when I came back to the UK after that wedding, I thought, okay, so where can I start? I'm a civil engineer. How can I start making positive impact for others? And I suddenly thought about a charity called Engineers Without Borders. It sounded quite logical for me to join them. And I joined them, and I was like, hey, I'm excited. I'm part of Engineers Without Borders. I'm going to start creating positive change now and do good things for the world. And I talked to them, and they said, well, we don't really have anything in your area. I was living in Reading, that's outside London. And they said, but if you want, you can come to London for our events, and you meet some people here. And I was like, well, if I have to go to London to make a positive impact, I don't think I'm gonna make that much of a positive impact, because you want to be starting doing something local that's easy for you, and you can really get a lot of stuff done. So I asked them, how about if I start my own branch of Engineers Without Borders here in Reading? And they were like, yeah, why not? Go ahead, do whatever you want. And so I set up the Engineers Without Borders Reading Regional Network back then. And I started running events for the charity. We were just picking our own topics around human development, international development, and sustainability, climate change, and started bringing people to give talks and share topics. And yeah, I was starting to see how bringing people together was something super powerful, because I saw how people started linking between them and connecting with other change makers, sharing ideas, brainstorming, inspiring each other. And I saw the huge ripple effects that has on people. So that was really a transforming point as well when I started seeing that happening back then.
Yeah, the ripple effect, I guess, and we'll come on to Good Ripple, which is the project that you're working on now, the venture you're working on now. And I guess I wanted to dig in a little bit into the point that you made a couple of times around this priorities in our lives, and you said even yourself, you found yourself slipping into that idea of what a good life looks like, what a capitalist life looks like, as you said. How do you think that we've ended up in a place like that, and kind of how much do you think that so social media, I guess, plays into that? Because, and what I'm kind of moving towards here is the idea of social networks being a really powerful point for change, and the kind of thing that you're trying to build with Good Ripple. And I heard someone say in a podcast not that long ago that everything changed when we moved from social networks to social media. And it was a real changing point from it being about connecting with like-minded people and building these good networks, and then more to a media platform which can be used for bad kind of things, or for pushing the wrong things. So yeah, just interested to dig a bit more into your thoughts on where we are with social media and where everything kind of started to go a little bit wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think going back to the experience in Western Sahara, what I found there is that, those deep values that people had about connections with people around in their communities and, their families, their friends, that was really powerful. And I think we used to have that, for example, in Spain. My dad told me that it used to be like that in Spain when he was young, but we've kind of lost that. And, from talking to other people from other countries and cultures, it seems to be like it used to be like that, but it's changed a lot. So we've kind of lost those values of being more connected and putting more value on people. And because of how our societies have developed, because of neoliberal capitalism and other factors, we're now more focused on individualism and collecting stuff around us. And I think we've reached a point where somehow, even if subconsciously, we've realized that we're missing something. And I think that's one of the reasons why social media has exploded so much, because we're missing that connection part in our lives. And social media suddenly is bringing us a lot of connections, right? And it's like, hey, here you are. You can connect with everyone in the world and tap into your missed connection. So I think part of that success is because we're not so connected with people around us anymore in our communities, so that we can just grab our phone and be connected with everyone around the world, which I think is a fantastic thing, right? If it's used correctly. I think the issue is that, again, back to the whole system, we've seen that social media, it's also a way that if it's taken advantage of, it can really be really harmful for people, from like, abuse in many ways of people. And then you see a lot of influencers these days promoting, lots of stuff for people to buy. And I was having a chat with somebody, a good change maker the other day, and she was like really frustrated about this, saying, hey, there's all of these influencers out there. They have like so much power. They're really influencing lots of people. And they're asking them to buy this, plastic stuff, or this like, really useless thing that creates a lot of pollution or whatever. So we're seeing how, we're not really making the most of social media. Because if we used it in a way that it's about really bringing people together with shared values, creating something positive, I think it's amazing. Like there's so many things that you can link, whether, it's just shared values, shared interests, and bringing people together. Even you can use social media at a local level, right? You can just have, whether it's a Facebook group or something else of people around you, and you can join there and you can meet more people. It's really amazing. But yeah, I think we need to become a lot more conscious of how we're using social media. And there's a really good platform I'd like to mention, that's called Curve. I don't know if
Okay.
you've come across
No, I've not
them.
come across it. No.
So it's Curve, as in Kurv. No, I think it might be with the C, actually. C. I think it's Curv. So like curve, but without the E at the end. So that's I had a chat with the founder, Carl Brown, a few weeks ago, and they're reinventing social media. They're creating a social media platform that's really not about, chasing the likes and the comments and the algorithm and all these things that make people be addicted to it. But actually, they're bringing more the social aspect of it. They are creating movements for people to join and really come together and collaborate based on shared interests. So it's bringing like all the good stuff on social media into it without bringing the bad stuff. So it's a really recent project. They're still like just starting, but I love it. So yeah, I encourage everyone to check it out.
That sounds really interesting. I'll definitely check it out and put a link in the show notes to that as well. So yeah, you hit on a point there around this. We feel more connected than ever in one way because we're more of a global society and we can access, speak to people. We can see celebrities on Twitter or online or wherever it might be, and it feels in one way that we're more connected than ever, and our problems are shared problems around the world, and they're global, which obviously is good in one way, but then we're losing that local connection. And you talk about this quite a lot, that we need to start local, really. So I wondered how you see Good Ripple fitting into this picture of connecting change makers, as you call them. And yeah, it'd be useful to kind of get your definition of a change maker as well, before we dive into this next question. But yeah, where do you see Good Ripple fitting into this picture of connecting people, but in a meaningful way that isn't, as you said before, potentially becoming overwhelming like some social media is, and not actually answering the right questions or solving the right issues?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, change maker, and that's a tricky one because yeah, everybody's got a different definition of change maker, and sometimes we actually struggle to put a label to people who are, for me, change maker is anybody who's making the world a better place in any way,
Mm-hmm.
or has the intention to make it. I
Okay.
think intention is also powerful because
Mm.
sometimes a lot of people have the intention to do something, but maybe they lack the resources, or they lack just a friend that pushes them a little bit, or somebody that's also doing something similar they can buddy up with, right? So I think the intention is also important. But yeah, for me, it's anyone that's creating a better world or thinking about creating a better world. But yeah, on the other side is like you don't really want to put labels because then it creates a little bit of a them and us sort
Mm.
of a scenario. And our goal really is to empower and create 8 billion change makers because I think
Wow.
everyone's got
Yeah.
the potential to become a change maker. So it's tapping into that potential and unleashing it. But yeah, so back to the point on Good Ripple, how it plays a role into all of this. So the idea for Good Ripple actually was born when I started running those events for Engineers Without Borders back in 2015, because I was putting so much energy, so much time, so much effort, and even money into finding these change makers in Reading around me to bring them to these events. And after running a few of these, I realized that I started meeting people who were change makers and they were living in my street. They were living in my neighborhood. And I was thinking, I could have been living here forever without knowing that you were just a couple, houses down the street. Like, how crazy is that? There's another person down there that wants to change the world similar to you, and you just don't know them. And that made me think, how many other people do we have around us that actually want to change the world, whether it's, sustainability, climate change, biodiversity, circular economy, social impact, mental health, anything. There's so many people out there that want to change the world or are thinking about it and just don't have enough connections to build up that motivation and go do it. Um, so I thought back then, oh, surely there's a mobile app where you can just go and see on the map all of these people so you can easily connect with them, because I'm like really wasting my time finding these people because it takes a lot of time and energy. So I was looking for that, couldn't find it, and spent the following 8 years trying to find that platform, find that app, and I never found it. I'm talking to a lot of people, there isn't a platform like that. So that's how last year I sort of came to the realization, and I did that through an exercise of sitting for 1 hour and reflecting, if I could only do one thing for the rest of my life to make a positive impact, what would that be? And I realized that good ripple is, for me, the single thing that can create the most impact in the world, because it's no longer about my impact, but about empowering others to amplify their impact. So that's how we started last year with Good Ripple. And the basic idea is to have a platform and a mobile app where you can see on a map all of these change makers around you, in your street, in your neighborhood, in your town, and you can very easily and very meaningfully start connecting with them, because you could, filter by whether it's interest or skills or SDGs or anything else. And yeah, you can just reach out and start connecting, start having, conversations, brainstorming, because it's really nice to connect online. If you meet people on LinkedIn or other places, it's great. But there's something magical when you have somebody down your street that
Mhm.
cares about the same thing, and you can just knock their door and have a tea together and chat about it and brainstorm ideas, or go for a walk together, or start building more community, or join forces with other local groups. Suddenly you start really strengthening your community, and there's something magical there, and we want really to empower people to tap into that magic. And then also we would bring a global element. Like, yeah, you can also, connect with people globally if you wanted. But I think that local aspect is really, really important. And also it would allow people, when you move to a different city, you can
Mhm.
straight away meet people who are interested in those life-changing and world-changing topics. And if you go on holidays, you can meet like these really amazing people who want to change the world in their part of the world, and you can join them, you can learn from them, you can share ideas. So it's about making it, local and global at the same time, and empower everyone to bring about positive change.
I love it. I love that idea. I think it can feel quite often now that people around you in your local town, your local village, wherever you may live, that no one is thinking about the same challenges as you, or they've all got different priorities. And then, but as you say, until you create somewhere where you can go to see who other people like you who are around, then you may not realize that there's someone just two doors down who's working on very similar problems, or might just have an interest, or might just be at that point where they want to, they've got an idea and they want to start making a change. And I think that's an interesting point
Yeah.
around change maker. Doesn't have to be someone that's already taking action. It can be someone that's wants to take action but doesn't quite know how, and that's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes they just need, that little inspiration, knowing that they're not alone. Because changing the world, it can seem like quite overwhelming when you try to do it on your own, because it's a big challenge. But suddenly when you start seeing, oh, there's more people out here around me that are trying similar things, so then it doesn't look that difficult. And I also just wanted to share an example, like a real life example.
Hmm.
So I've been living in this house in Shrewsbury for a year and a half now, and here in town for 2.5 years. And just 2 months ago, I met this girl that she lives just two streets down our house, and she's like an amazing change maker. And I've been living here for a year and a half in this house, and I didn't know she was there, literally like just a couple of houses down the road. And it was because somebody else that I know, they told me, oh, there's this event, this climate fresk workshop going on in your neighborhood. If you want to attend, it's actually a neighbor of yours that is running that workshop. And I was like, okay, I don't know that neighbor, but I'll come to the workshop. So I went to the climate fresk workshop. That was around a month and a half ago. And this neighbor, she delivered the thing, and I was so inspired by her that I went on to become a climate fresh facilitator. So I did my training a couple of weeks ago, and yesterday I ran my first climate fresh workshop, where I facilitated it with my neighbor. Both of us, we did it together, so I had a little bit of support on the first one. And it's like, suddenly I helped empowering these 7 people who attended to gain knowledge about climate change, to feel empowered about sharing their emotions and brainstorming actions. And that all happened thanks to my neighbor, because if it wasn't for her running that workshop that I first attended, I wouldn't be doing this. So, there's a huge ripple effect of things. And now we're talking about doing more workshops and expanding this to the whole of town, the whole of the county, and, taking it to other level. And all of that's happening, for all of those little ripple effects that happen. And I think something important to share at this point is that
Mm,
we are way too obsessed in our society with trying to measure everything, particularly in the impact and the climate space. We forget about everything that's not measurable.
mm.
And I think, uh, that's a big failure, because yes, we need to be measuring stuff. It's important to have data and measure it, and make the right decisions based on data, but we cannot just obsess about measuring stuff, because there's a lot of non-measurable things in life that are super important as well. This ripple effect, you cannot measure it, right? You cannot know how much of what I'm going to do in my life is thanks to that workshop that she did, but that's got part of the cause of all of that, right? So I think like now everything I'm going to do related to climate threats was thanks to her, and thanks to that other person that introduced me to her. So, the ripple effect is just huge. And I think if we tap into that ripple effect, we can change the world a lot faster.
Yeah, I think this comes up. It's come up in a few conversations I've had that we're quite bad, I think, as humans at seeing the steps that it takes to get to a big goal at the end. We always look at the end goal, whether it's especially with something like climate change, which is a huge global problem. And we look at it and we think, how are we ever going to tackle something like that? And we're very bad at when we get to a goal, we can look back and go, oh yeah, those were all the steps, and it was just one little step at a time, one little conversation, one idea that led to the next one, that led to the next one, and then before you know it, one day, which maybe years, maybe decades down the line, we get to where we need to. And I just think we're quite bad, and I think it's well known that we're quite bad at getting almost paralyzed by that big end goal and not thinking about each tiny step and the journey that it takes to get there, right?
Yeah, 100%.
um so I wanted to dig a bit more into a point that you touched on there around communication, and that point around measurement. And I noticed a post of yours on social media a little while back, and you put as the headline, "The way we talk about climate change is wrong," you said. And you were talking about this idea of scientists working in climate change, or whoever it might be, focusing on things like statistics, reports, things like that. And I thought that was a really good point and something I think about quite a lot. So could you dig into that a little bit more in terms of what you think we're getting wrong in terms of the way we talk about climate change and how we can improve that?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons we still have climate change is because we have really failed for decades to communicate that message to the majority of the population. Scientists, they have this deep understanding of the problem, and they've wanted for so many decades to keep it like very professional and very scientific, to try and convince people, with showing data and statistics and graphs and figures. But for the large majority of citizens out there, that doesn't trigger action. And for the large majority, it actually makes them feel stupid, because maybe they don't understand it. And if you don't understand something, you feel stupid about it, and then there's no way you're going to be motivated to take action. So I think one of the key challenges we have right now, and it's, I think there's a lot of optimism in there, because I see this happening a lot more. It's taking the message from the scientists and simplifying that in a way that's like really relatable and actionable by average citizens, by everyone around us who have maybe not a technical background. There's these videos coming out now from Climate Breakthrough. I think you might have seen them,
I know the ones you mean.
where
Yeah.
where they take a scientist and they take maybe a stand-up comedy person, or someone in that area, and they translate what the scientist is saying. And I find that like really fascinating, because that way you can really start reaching people. People who don't care that much about the figures, but care about what's relatable to them. And I think that they've done a lot of research, and they find that, talking about abstract concepts like climate change and, net zero targets, things like that, really doesn't move people to take action. Yeah, you can move, the people who are very much into sustainability. And sometimes we feel that maybe that's everyone, because if we are in these bubbles, right, surrounded by these people, it's like, yeah, everyone cares about these figures and statistics. But when you have a chat with your neighbor or somebody, in a cafe in your town, you realize that most people don't get it because they're not in that bubble. So, making it, translating that message, making it very simple. Maybe rather than talking about climate change, you can talk about carbon pollution or just pollution. Trying to find a common ground where it's actually something that they care about. I think that's a big win. And that's something that Catherine Hayhoe, the climate scientist, she talks about a lot. Like, you can talk to people and find a common ground, something that they already care about. Maybe it's, something to do with flooding. Here in Shrewsbury, we have lots of river flooding, and we're seeing worse flooding happening more often a lot. So it's like, maybe that's something they care about. So you can start there and start the conversation and see what they care about, and start sharing those emotions. And maybe then, trying to come up with a couple of ideas that they can start doing, and, something small. Because again, like, you cannot take people to make like big systemic action if they haven't started doing the small changes. I think you mentioned before, like, we have to take these incremental steps, right? Um, Understanding that we're all at different points in this journey, I think it's important, because yes, we need urgent action, but if we just keep putting people off, that's not going to happen. So we really need to bring people on board in a very accessible way and motivate them to take more incremental action. Because I think at the end of the day, it's all about building a critical mass of citizens who care about the topic. And then, systemic change will just happen as a result, because a lot of people are demanding, are talking about it, it's top of mind, it's important. So everything else will change to accommodate that demand. So yeah, I think we really need to make an effort to talk more about climate change, but keep it very simple and keep it very local and relatable to people.
Yeah, and it's a psychology problem, isn't it, more than anything that we're facing with, and science, a psychology and a communication challenge that we've got with communicating and getting climate change action underway more than anything, isn't it, I guess?
Yeah, exactly. It's like our brain is hardwired to, react to immediate threats. So something that's like, you can see that there's a threat right now and you have to do something about it. But thinking about a concept that's happening, you see it in the future, and it's like such a big global scale, it's not relatable to you. And there's just, it's very difficult for the human brain to process that and say, I have to do something now about that thing in the future. That's like, because also it's sort of a progressive change, right? It's not like something that's quick and now. So yeah, our brain really struggles to process that information and take action. So I think that's why we really need to try to make it more like, hey, it's happening right now and you can see it around you. So yeah, let's start together doing something about it.
I like the humor example you use, bringing humor into it. It's something that I always lean towards humor because I enjoy comedy and like to bring it in. And I think I'm trying to bring it in again to my communication style a bit more, because coming from a scientific background, I thought, oh no, I need to stay in the statistics. I made that classic mistake of, because statistics made me take action and I found them powerful, I'd move towards that. And then I think, oh, using humor and is making it less serious. It's making a bit of a mockery of a very serious situation, so I shouldn't do it. And then I realized I was getting things completely the wrong way around, and actually using humor is a tool for connecting with different types of people, for bringing what can be quite a dry scientific subject to more people. So I've kind of gone full circle on that thinking.
Yeah, I think the magic there is in triggering emotions, right? And you said before, like, seeing a statistic, it inspires you to make change, but that's not the statistic itself, but it's probably that emotion that's triggering in you that statistic. The thing is, for most people, a number, a figure is not triggering an emotion. So then there's no action that can happen as a result. So as you said, like bringing that humor aspect, that can really trigger that emotion and get people into action. Because I think, again, back to the problem of why we still have climate change is scientists have tried to, generally everyone with a technical background, try to move away from emotions, right? They want to keep it very data driven and very technical. Unfortunately, again, that's not how the human brain works. We work with emotions. So if we can trigger an emotion, that's where you can trigger people to take action. So I think translating again those messages into something that really brings out the emotions in people, that's really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, and there've been some interesting examples I know I've seen, particularly from people like Donald Trump. Don't want to use him as someone to look up to, but actually from a communication side of things and communicating on that emotive level, there's a really interesting example. I'll try and find it of a debate, which is there's a scientist talking about the possible implications of a vaccine and the links to autism, and kind of trying to disprove it using facts and figures, and then throwing out all these scientific facts and saying that there is no link and there's no kind of statistics that back up this possible link. And then after that, Donald Trump gives a speech and he brings in all these emotive words, doesn't talk about statistics, but talks about the size of the needle and how one of his close family friends had a child that ended up with autism because of what he said was the vaccine, and was using like family and friends and emotive words and the size of the needle, things like that, to get that message across. And obviously it's not a great example in terms of the message, but that stuck with me as a real eye-opener in terms of, I looked at the scientist and I heard what the scientist was saying. And to me, that was like, well, it's obvious. The statistics say that it doesn't cause this. So therefore, I'm going to believe them. But I then didn't put two and two together and think, well, for a lot of people, they're going to listen to the emotive story and that's going to have much more connection with them. So there's actually lots of cases where we can probably learn from all sides of the political spectrum how to communicate better in a climate science viewpoint.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So yeah, where to go now? I mean, there's so many ways we could go. I think an interesting point I've seen you post about also recently was this concept that you came up with, again, trying to think, how do we capture more minds? How do we get more people to care about climate change? And it was this concept of the climate funnel, and you were bringing in a concept from sales and marketing, which I thought was a nice idea, and again a testament to how we can potentially, in the climate or the change maker community, how we can bring in ideas from other areas to solve problems. So could you just give us a little bit more of a background of what the climate funnel is and how that relates to making change?
Yeah, definitely. And it's an exciting one for me because like sort of I had been talking about the climate funnel for a long time without really giving it a name or a visual frame to it. And when I suddenly joined the two concepts, for me it was like an eureka moment, a small one, but for me it meant a lot putting that into a visual and actually seeing that funnel, how we can make more people to come into the funnel. I was sharing to my girlfriend the first time I came up with it. And she was like, well, you just put together a sales funnel with climate. There's no genius to it. I was like, okay. Okay, yeah, maybe it's not that great. But yeah, I think for me, it's a really visual way to see why we're not really achieving that change that we need to achieve. Because like, for us in the sustainability space, we are at the bottom of that channel, of the funnel. We're taking high impact actions to create systemic change. And somehow we think that there's a lot of people down there. There's a lot of people at the bottom of the funnel. But actually, most people are still at the very top of the funnel or even outside the funnel. So outside the funnel is what we would call either deniers, or people who are not that aware of climate change. And I think a lot of people sit on the top of the funnel because maybe they are aware, but at a very, very superficial, way. So right now, there's a lot of people outside the funnel, and the funnel is really wide at the top where we have just an awareness layer there. And if we really want to create systemic change, so right now it's very narrow at the bottom and very wide at the top. And we need to invert that funnel. We need to bring a lot of people into the funnel and help them going through the different stages. So the main stages I came up with is awareness at the top, then motivation, then low impact action, then high impact action. So it's really a good framework for people to understand also that you just don't go from one stage at the top to the last one at the bottom. You have to go to those different stages. It's very unlikely that you haven't thought about taking any action and you wake up one day and start going to protests and start writing to your MPs and joining movements and things like that. Like everything goes for different stages. I think I haven't met any activist who didn't start by swapping their plastic bottle with a reusable one or things like that, because we say, yeah, those what I call low impact individual actions won't change the world. And I agree and disagree with that. It's like the action itself, yes, it won't change the world, but that action helps you build a mindset that eventually will help you do more of the high impact actions that are the ones that really need it at the bottom of that funnel. So when we look at that framework of the climate funnel, we see that also we need to learn to change how we communicate to people in different stages, because you cannot talk the same way to someone who's outside of the funnel, who's not aware of climate change or just very lightly aware, than to someone who's down at the bottom of the channel, who's already taking lots of actions. You need to, adapt your speech to them to really help them move into the next stage. So maybe somebody that's a little bit aware of climate change, but not really motivated about taking actions. So you can start, as we said before, not talking maybe about climate change, but talking about pollution or something more relatable to them, whether it's river flooding in the area or whether it's, just the air pollution that's happening everywhere. So try to make it more relatable and not so technical. Then as you start moving down the funnel, you can bring in a little bit more complexity and a little bit more technical things, because people will have more of background, more interest in the topic. But learning to adapt to people in all of those different stages, I think is key to help everyone move from unaware to aware, motivated, low impact, high impact. So it's about finding people where they are and communicating in a way that's inspiring to them to move to the next stage, and giving them not too much too early, because if you give them too much too early, you can really overwhelm them and they can just shut down and just keep outside of the funnel or just at the very top. So yeah, I think it's a good framework for people to think, okay, how can I adapt my conversation if somebody I feel that they are not aware or just lightly aware, or maybe they're motivated but they're still not taking action. So maybe I can share a few easy actions that they can start taking so that they move to the next stage, and that way going forward to the bottom. I think once we get to a point where the funnel is wider at the bottom than at the top, systemic change is just a result of that. We've built that critical mass of having a lot of people really demanding that change. And that's where we need to get. We need to invert that funnel that at the moment is very narrow at the bottom and wide at the top.
I really love that concept, and it's such an important one in terms of, again, coming back to communication. How you communicate to one person could be completely different to how you communicate to another person or group of people, depending on where they are in that funnel. And also that point around individual action is an interesting one, and I've not heard it described in those terms before, but I know it's, yeah, you do hear people reaching, saying that there's no point. It's these little actions don't have an impact. The problem's too big. We need to be looking at governments or looking at again, it's this problem of thinking too big. But you said there around it almost being, it's building that persona, that behavioral change slowly. It could be a very small action that maybe it doesn't have an impact on the client, but it could have a very significant impact on your persona as a change maker or as someone that's starting to take action. So I really like that framing of it. Of, you may feel like it's a small action and a bit disheartened. What impact am I having? But if you think of yourself as that action as forming a habit or as shaping your overall journey, then it's a much more empowering way of thinking about just taking a very small action.
Yeah, and I think that, when we say, we individual action won't change the world, we need systemic action. I think that's fine where you're talking to people at the bottom of the funnel, right? Because they're already aware of these things. They know that, stopping using the plastic straw is not going to stop climate change, right? But I think we need to be careful, because if you're saying that and there's people that are not at the bottom of the funnel listening or reading to that message, what they actually hear is like, sit back and relax because it's somebody else's problem. You cannot change the world. It's the governments and the corporates that need to change it, because they're still not aware of how collective action and all of that works. So I think we need to be very, very careful how we communicate in that sense, because if the large majority of people who are reading that message are not at the bottom of the channel, it can really backfire and it's really disempowering for them. So I think we really need to make an effort to try and empower more people to take action and say, hey, yeah, if you are at that stage, maybe stop using plastic straw, because that's what you can do at that stage in your journey. Because if you tell them no, that's not going to change the world. What you need to do is start protesting in the streets and joining these movements and writing to your PMs. MPs, sorry. That's gonna be like, whoa, I'm not gonna do all of that, right? So yeah, I think it's understanding where people are and being careful of how we communicate, and with the ultimate purpose of really empowering whoever's listening or reading to take action at whichever level they are. And again, like the mindset, I think it's something that we're really undervaluing a lot. Because building that mindset of a change maker, it takes time. You don't just wake up one day and stop driving and sell your car and change your house and make it super energy efficient and all the rest, or go vegan. Like, those things take time, right? So we need to understand that people need to build a mindset to get to that point. And we just, don't need to undervalue that. So if taking a small action is what they feel like doing at that point, then that's good for them to build that mindset. You can then help them to, maybe become a bit more aware of, hey, there's some actions that are more impactful than others. But, if they're just at the aware section, stage in the funnel, and you start talking to them about high impact actions, it's quite likely that they just put off and stop listening. So yeah, adapting again, it's key.
That demanding of perfection is something that's used often as a as a counteract to why bother, why should we be taking these changes. And I found that a particularly powerful message or way of communicating with people who are towards the top of that funnel that you describe, in terms of it of course it's overwhelming to think about what perfection looks like, or what if that is even possible to live in today's world. So what would that even look like, to live a perfectly green life? I don't know if it's even possible anymore. But to say that it's okay to work towards that point gradually, and to not keep demanding perfection, because if we keep demanding perfection, we're just gonna keep turning people off, aren't we?
Yeah, I think something that I'm super passionate about is that concept of, we don't need a few perfect change makers. What we need instead is 8 billion imperfect change makers, right?
Yeah.
We need everyone doing something, doing what they can, because not everyone can take all the same actions, right? It depends a lot on where you are in the world, your background, your circumstances. Not everyone can do absolutely everything. Some people, for health reasons, they cannot go vegan. Some people really need a car to go somewhere because maybe, they have some sort of disability and it's the only way they can move, right? So we need to understand that there's life circumstances for people are different. And if we all do something, then we can reach that critical mass again, that it will create a better system. It will really make the system change. So we have better options, and sustainability will become just the only option, right? We need to sort of get to that point. But yeah, we need to understand that everybody is got a different circumstance in life.
Mm.
And one thing that I also try to advocate about is, again, what you just said about not calling each other a hypocrite as well. Because, you know, when you are especially down at the bottom of the funnel, I see this a lot when people are really into it. Some people put a lot of moral superiority to certain actions. And then even down there, you start seeing a little bit of fighting and friction in like, oh no, but I've done this, but you don't do that. And, you know, I'm a vegan and you're not vegan, but okay, maybe you gave up your car, and, you know, okay, but stop flying, but you eat meat. And it's like, you start like just fighting with each other
Yeah.
in a complete nonsense, right? It's about, hey, we can all do something, and let's do that something and inspire each other to do more, but not pointing fingers at each other saying, hey, you're not perfect, because there's nobody perfect. There's really nobody perfect. So I think that's something important that we need to tackle as well, and collaborate more at that bottom stage of the funnel, rather than just calling each other hypocrites because nobody's perfect.
Yeah, it's obviously an emotive subject, and particularly if people are working on it all the time and they're very passionate about it, it's obviously understandable that those emotions come out. But you could probably apply it to anything, any interest in life or any passion. If you look at a band or something, for example, like there's going to be that top 5% of fans that are obsessive, that own everything, that do, go to every concert, that can't understand why everyone else doesn't love that band as much as they do, that doesn't worship them in the same way. And you could apply this to any concept, and it's that idea that you're gonna get these people that are amazing, almost perfect, living this sustainable life, but you also, it'd be much better to have the 8 billion people, like you say, living an imperfect, sustainable, but much more sustainable life, and we're much more likely to get to where we need to get to, well, much quicker anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And something I forgot to mention before, there's for the people outside the climate funnel, and especially the deniers, or I think they call them also these dismissive people.
Mm.
It's an interesting one, because the general advice you get is like, just don't bother with those people because they're not gonna convert. They're not gonna believe in it. But it's interesting, in my experience, a lot of people who deny climate change agree with absolutely everything else. So I've had conversations with people where they were like, yes, we're polluting the planet. Yes, we're producing too much emissions. Yeah, that it's all a mess. We really need to change that because that's all wrong. We're killing so many species. We're destroying biodiversity. That's all wrong. We really need to change that. We need to act because that's really wrong. And there's so much pollution in the air, in the rivers. We need to change all of that. They agree with absolutely everything in cutting emissions, in stopping deforestation. But then you mention climate change, and they switch. And it's like, no, that we cannot change the climate. You know, human beings have no power to change climate. And the conversation totally changes and becomes defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, sometimes it's interesting how climate deniers are actually agreeing with everything in those stages, with all of those actions that we need to get to avoid or you know, reverse climate change. So sometimes just not mentioning climate change can be quite powerful,
Yeah, I
because
agree.
some deniers actually agree with everything else. It's just that they don't believe that we have the power to change the climate in the world. They say, no, climate's been changing forever, and all of these arguments. So sometimes it's just better to leave that out, leave climate change out of the topic and tackle everything else. Okay, so let's work together in cutting emissions. Let's work together in changing the system, because they actually agree with that. So sometimes, yeah, it's powerful to see, you know, how, what people believe, what not, how do they feel about everything,
Mm.
and maybe not using those words that can trigger a conflict or negativity.
it's become so polarized, hasn't it? Like so many issues, and it's an identity thing now, and we're very we change our behaviors, our opinions based on what people are saying around us, our peers, our family members, and climate change has definitely got to that point where it's become unfortunately so polarized. But you're completely right. There's so many points of entry that people care about, and it goes back to thinking local again and thinking about local problems, because that's what we all really care about deep down is what's going on more locally with our family, our communities. And there's always something there that you can find a connection with 99%, if not 100% of people. There's going to be something. I mean, I work in nature and in that side of things, and I find that nature is a really good way to connect with the vast majority of people, because a lot of people have a connection with nature or with wildlife, or with, whether it's just going out for a walk in a local park, or whether it's bird watching or something else. There seems to be a connection there, and that way of tapping into, well, maybe we should be concerned about what's happening there. And have you noticed that there's been less birds in your garden recently, and or something like that? And quite often oh yeah, that is something I've noticed. And then through potentially fixing that issue, you can also tackle the issues of climate change and other issues around the environment at the same time. So yeah, I'm a big believer, like you, in finding those bits of common ground. It can be quite interesting sometimes where you can find that common ground or that connection with someone maybe you thought there was no chance of having a conversation about climate change with. It can be really interesting. I just got me thinking, it'd be a cool resource to have where people could share perhaps unusual ways they've managed to connect on the topic, or different routes they've found into conversations with family members or with people, and managed to get them to connect with these issues. I don't know if you've got any other ways, or you've had any other experience yourself in terms of trying to win people round who are very much putting the walls up around climate change, and you've managed to find a way to connect with them on another level.
Yeah, I think for me, something that works, it's not talking so much about climate change, but talking about improving the world. I think, a lot of people resonate with that, in the sense like, yeah, most people would like to improve the world, make the world a better place. I think this type of framing, it really works with getting people on board with you. Because like, if you say, would you like to make the world a better place? Most people would agree with that,
Yeah,
right?
it'd be pretty bad if
Um,
you said no, sure.
yeah, exactly. There'll be very few people that will be like, oh no, I don't want to make the world a better place. So that's a really good starting point, because you'll see that it's a lot easier to get people on your side if you start like, okay, how can we make the world a better place together? Maybe there's something, again, here locally, river pollution is a big one. So, can we I don't know, try and find some ways of improving river pollution and make it more clean? Can we sign a petition? There's some petitions going on at the moment to make the river swimmable again. And I started hearing people like, oh yeah, well actually, 30 years ago when I was young, I used to swim in that river, and that was super fun. And yeah, it's true. Now we cannot go because it's so polluted. And suddenly, you start uncovering these things. And it kind of goes back a little bit to what we mentioned initially about community. And I think at the moment, for a lot of people, it's difficult to have these conversations because we don't really have that sense of community. It's like you talk to your neighbor, maybe, some people don't even talk to the neighbors, right? But if you talk to your neighbor, maybe you don't know that much about them. And that's one of the reasons why people struggle to find that common ground. Because like, okay, how do I start? Is it, does she care about the river, the air pollution, the birds? And you don't really know where to start. So I think as a whole strategy, working in strengthening community, and even if it's not talking about climate change for a start, but just getting to know your neighbor better, just through have a conversation, invite them for dinner, something like that. And then you start getting to know them better. Suddenly you start noticing what they care about. And then you can bring in some of those topics a lot easier. But yeah, I find myself there. Sometimes I say, okay, this neighbor, what can I try to find in terms of common ground? It's difficult. But then I think, okay, so I'm gonna bring them over for dinner, and then I find out more about them and strengthening the relationship. And it's just fun. It's good. You feel better because you're more connected to people around you, and eventually you find these little things that you can tap into. The other day, my neighbor, for example, she came in and she was telling me, I thought she didn't care a lot about climate change or pollution or anything in particular in these environmental issues. And she was telling me how they had picked a present for a friend, and she was like, all their friends, they wanted to wrap it in some sort of plastic wrapping, whatever. She was like, I don't know, but that's too polluting, and we need to use something more sustainable. Maybe we don't wrap it at all, or and so that we don't use that many resources. And it was like, wow, look at that. I didn't expect that at all. And suddenly we've got some common ground to expand and talk more about it. So even if it's not something that's gonna stop climate change, but that she cares about plastic pollution or about resource extraction, and then you can start expanding on those topics. So yeah, just having those connections with the community around you, I think it's super, super powerful.
That's that ripple effect in action, kind of. I think
Yeah.
you do see it, and again, it's slow change because in a lot of people, but I am seeing it more and more in people that I don't
Mm.
expect. Something similar to that coming out of their mouths around, or maybe we shouldn't do this, or maybe we shouldn't buy loads of gifts that people don't want this Christmas. We should do the right thing for the planet. And so that ripple effect is happening. It's just maybe not happening as fast as some of us would like, but it's definitely there. I mean, are you hopeful kind of that things are changing, that we're going to move quickly enough? Is letting things gradually ripple out going to get us to where we need to get to quick enough? How hopeful, big question, but yeah, how hopeful are you feeling at the moment, Carlos, in terms of that? Are you still optimistic?
I'm very optimistic. Yes, I think that's something in my personality in everything in life. I'm a very optimistic person, but I think without hope, it's really difficult to take action. If you think that it's all lost, then what's the point,
Mm.
right? I'll just carry on living my life, enjoying, having a good time, and that's it. So I think having hope, it's really what keeps us going. And I do believe there's hope. We see all of these graphs and projections of how the future is gonna be with 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees warming because emissions keep going up. But I have a lot of faith in humanity, and I think at the moment, because again, there's so many people who are just unaware or very aware of the topic, enough action is not happening. And a lot of these projections, they kind of see that, that's going to continue, right? But as we progress, like if we really wanted as a society, as a species, we could change this very quickly. I think the typical example with COVID, right? When things get really, really bad, everybody's seeing it, we make it work. And we come together and we find the solutions, we innovate together, and we cooperate and we make it work. Because I think, human beings, we've got that capacity of collaborating and innovating, that makes us unique in many ways. So I do believe that, yes, maybe, it's not going to be ideal. We might reach some tipping points, and we might lose some of the, biodiversity and some species, and things might get a little bit complicated in some areas of the world. But I think as we get to that stage, we will see more reaction to it. More people will become aware, and more people will start taking more action. So it's a little bit that movie, Don't Look Up. I don't know if you've watched it with
Yeah,
Leonardo DiCaprio.
yeah.
That at the end it's too late. But I think we're not gonna get to that point where it's too late. So yeah, we might get to a point where things get a little bit challenging, like really challenging. But I think at that point we will really say, hey, let's come together, let's fix this, because now a lot of people are aware and are demanding it. Obviously, we need to do what we can to get to that point sooner rather than later.
Hmm.
But I'm really faithful that we have the capacity as humanity to turn things around. Worst case, will be wiped out of the planet, and I'm sure the planet will continue without us. But I don't think we will get there. I've got a lot of hope and faith in us as a species.
Yeah, we need to be hopeful and optimistic still, because you're right. If we're too pessimistic, which is often the case in the environmental world, the climate world, you do end up getting people switching off. That suddenly, that ripple effect, that slow change, that gradual change, which is occurring, gets halted because it feels, well, why bother if we're not going to get there? So we do have to be careful, I think, as much as those negative stories and those statistics do get some people into action, are they actually having a more of a negative effect? And how do we balance that clear urgency of a problem with not switching people off completely? It's an ongoing challenge that I think we could probably still be better at.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a couple things there. Like one, like science is based on statistics and probability, right? So, it may be a little bit more conservative, a little less, but things may change over time as we start to come up with other innovations and really cutting down on emissions, things might get better. So there's one element of uncertainty there, in the sense that, even if we're pessimistic, like, we may as well, do something that can make things better. And to me, as long as there's one species alive and there's one human being alive, there's still something to save. So let's try and save it. Even if we destroy half of the species in the planet, half of the population of human beings, there's still something to save.
Mm-hmm.
So even if things get bad, there's still a responsibility, an ability to take action, to take a response about it and make things happen. So for me, as long as there's something that we can save, then it's worth trying. Whether we can save the whole of the planet, all the species, that's great. But even if it's half of it, it's still worthwhile. Even if we are at that point where we can lose half of the planet in terms of biodiversity and human beings, but let's try our best to save as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. So a big part of why to just do this podcast and what something I want to get out of this podcast is for anyone out there who's listening who might be wanting to become a change maker or wanting to take action to tackle some of the environmental problems that we're facing. And that's why I'm interviewing people like yourself who have already been taking action and on that entrepreneurial journey to really create a big change that we need. So I wanted to dig a bit more into your entrepreneurial side, if that's okay, and a bit more of your journey and what you've done so far on it. And I read an interesting post of yours recently around how you said actually in the past you did really struggle with public speaking, you were quite introverted, and it was after you moved to the UK that you took some action to kind of address those points and to improve yourself. So just thought it'd be an interesting point to get into a bit more in terms of what action did you take and how did that shape the kind of entrepreneur that you've turned into now?
Yeah, so the public speaking is a funny one because I've been always quite an introvert. I would struggle to speak up in class. I would get super nervous and I really didn't like it at all. Even at uni, I just wouldn't want to put myself in that position when we had to, share something with the whole of the class. I wouldn't really like it. But when I started working here in the UK, at that point, I started learning a lot about psychology, and I started learning a bit more about how my mind works. Something that was like a really simple realization is that I was being fearful of the people around me, right? That's why I wouldn't like it. And because I would see them like, it would be alienating in a way. But suddenly I shifted that. I was like, all of these are just normal human beings, just like me, that normal people. And I'm just talking to people. So there's nothing, weird or difficult about it, just like we're talking now, right? So that mind shift, that really allowed me to start talking more in public and actually enjoying it. That doesn't mean I don't get nervous. I still get nervous, but more like excited. I don't see it as a bad nervous, but as a good excitement about, hey, I'm going to share something with a lot of people, and this is a good opportunity to make a positive impact. So I want to do my best. So I do still get, a little bit of nerves. But so when I was working for my previous employer before I became an entrepreneur, I sort of shifted a little bit away from my day-to-day role, and I started giving motivational sessions in the office, because I learned again a lot about motivation, psychology, and I realized that I could share some of these things. I could see people around me maybe didn't know that much about it. So I ran the first one in my office in Reading, where I used to live there. And it was a great success. Like, lots of people came, they really liked it. And some people, more like senior management, were really enjoying it. And they suggested for me to go do that same thing in other offices. So suddenly, rather than working on civil engineering stuff, I was giving motivational sessions in a few offices around the UK. And I really enjoyed that. I really, really enjoyed that. It was, I saw the impact of that public speaking, of, sharing something you've learned with other people, and empowering them to take action, learn something, and, improve their lives and the lives of others around them. So that's how I got into public speaking back then. Yeah.
And you've kind of taken that further and further. Now you're becoming a bit of a LinkedIn influencer, I'd say, and you've grown your following quite substantially, so above 20,000 followers now, and in the space of not very long, really. I mean, what have you learned from doing that, from that platform? Any kind of lessons for other aspiring entrepreneurs or people looking to start businesses in the environmental sphere, and how important that kind of personal brand side of things has been? And
Yeah. I think it's amazing, honestly, and I never expected all of these success, if we want to call it success,
yeah,
or growth.
yeah,
I started last year in November because I thought, okay, I want to do this good Ripple thing. Now, how do I get people interested in it, right? And from previous from other projects that I've got, I've tried a lot of marketing, and most of it not very successfully. And I realized, I want to try and do something more organic, not so much into, putting money into Facebook or other platforms
yeah.
to put my ad in front of people, but something more organic. And I had been learning quite a bit about personal branding. And I said, okay, so I'm going to try LinkedIn, just because it's the only social media platform that I use. And I quite like LinkedIn because people have their jobs and their employers attached to them. And that makes the whole platform, a little bit less maybe negative or confrontational compared to Twitter or Instagram, other places where maybe there's more hate speech because people, can create a lot more fake accounts, and there's not so much responsibility behind it in a way. So I thought I'd go with LinkedIn because it's the only one I use, and I like it. I thought, okay, so I'll start sharing content around change making, sustainable development goals, social impact, sustainability, and see where it goes, see if people like it or not. So I spent like a month developing a strategy, doing a couple of courses about how to do everything properly. And then beginning of November, I started posting. And I said from one day to another, I went from 0 posts a week to 7 posts a week. Most people tell you start little by little if you cannot commit.
You went
But
all
I
in.
really wanted to go all in because I thought, if I want to make this happen, I need to put the effort and the energy in. And what I did was I posted, my first post was, I've been thinking about this for a long time, enough talking and more doing, or something like that.
Mm.
And I kind of shared publicly that from that day onwards, I was going to post something every day. And that sort of gave me a lot of accountability, because even if just, I don't know, maybe just a couple people saw that post, but I was accountable to those people. I had put it there. So that kept me going. And then I started doing it daily. And you know, it's funny how maybe you are an expert, or maybe you have all of this knowledge, all of these skills, or all this passion. I think passion is an overlooked one, but it's a
Mm.
very important one as well. And maybe you are not known, right, in the world out there, and suddenly building a personal brand, it gives you a lot of authority in a way. And I find it amazing that it brings you so many opportunities just because you have this number below your name. You know, before I was Carlos, now I'm Carlos, 23,000 followers. And that makes a big difference.
Mm.
And I'm like, how crazy is that, right? Like we've lived in this world with just a number. You know, before I couldn't try to go speak in an event, or I couldn't try to, you know, do a podcast like this. But suddenly, because I've got this number attached to me, I've got given all of these opportunities. And I think it's a great thing in a way, because, you know, it's something that on the one hand, if you have those followers, it's probably because you're doing something valuable for people. I think for me, that was the key from the very beginning, is like, I'm going to share everything I know, everything I can,
Hmm.
and I'm going to put the time, energy, effort to create these resources that I think are very helpful for change makers so that they can create more positive impact. So ultimately, I think that's what, you know, every creator will tell you, like it's down to creating value for people. So in a way, having those followers, it means people are valuing what you are creating, right? So in a good way, it's positive if you are creating something that's valuable for the world. I think back to the concept of the ikigai, is not just something you are like, you love, and you can be paid for, but something also that's valuable for the world, that it makes a positive impact. I think that's a key one.
Hmm.
But yeah, the journey, it's been really amazing, especially meeting people. That's been for me the highlight, like meeting people like you and so many other change makers. You know, if I hadn't started on LinkedIn, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And to me, that's powerful, because in the last year, I've met more change makers than in my entire life.
Hmm.
And the amount of opportunities that I've been given, again, from, you know, going to panel discussions, podcast events, collaborations. Now there's a lot of people reaching out to me to do collaborations together. It's like, oh, all these people want to work with me. Like before I had that number, nobody would want to work with me because I was just Carlos. Who is Carlos, right? So it's a really nice way, I think, to access a lot more opportunities for a good purpose. So I would strongly recommend anyone, you know, in the impact space. I think we need a lot more people sharing their life stories, sharing who they are, and creating that content to learn from each other. I think it's powerful. There's some magic in there, and when it's used for a good purpose, can really make a difference. Yeah.
There's a theme building here around ripples, I feel, and yeah, it's you don't just buy 20,000 followers. It, like you said, it takes a lot of hard work. It takes continually doing a post every single day and adding value, and therefore by having that goal of it is growth, I guess, but you're growing towards something meaningful, and on the journey there you're meeting people, they're then going off and doing what they're doing, and that ripple effect again spreads out. So yeah, if you're doing it for the right reason like you are, and not just growing for growth's sake, and as there is a lot of obviously on social media, and we've got to be careful not to celebrate that wrong kind of growth, which just can cause problems and issues in society. And I think it is okay to celebrate, you know, that almost this idea of growth and celebrity in a way, of as long as it's doing of the right things and it's having a good impact.
Yeah, no, I think there's value in there, and there's also a little risk in there that I almost fell in myself, because, you know, suddenly I grew to 10,000 people, followers in a few months, and you see a lot of people doing this on LinkedIn. Like they choose a topic, they grow, and once they grow, they change the topic, and they just
Mm.
become a LinkedIn expert, and they start, you know,
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, yeah.
telling other people how to grow on LinkedIn. I actually fell in that trap, I must admit. And, you know, when I got there, I was like, oh, I've really cracked how to grow on LinkedIn. Now I can maybe sell this to other
Mm.
people. And I tried for a little bit, but luckily, I actually had one person reaching out to me in a negative way. And that really made me reflect a lot, saying, hey, Carlos, this is not why you started this. You're going away from your purpose.
Mm.
And I'm glad that person did that, because it made me realize, hey, I want to go back on track. Like, I started this for a reason, to help people make an impact in the world. And I want to stay on that track, because that's really where my heart and my values are. So, just sharing that for people who maybe start this journey, they may be tempted at some point to say, hey, now I can sell what I've learned, because it's true that there's value in that experience. But I would encourage people to stay true to their initial mission, or maybe it's a different mission. Of course, you can pivot, but
Yeah.
in that direction of creating purpose and meaning, I think that's important.
We've got a lot of there's a lot of great LinkedIn marketers and people talking about LinkedIn growth. So I think you did the right thing, Carlos, of sticking with your mission, because I've seen that happen with a few people out there. It's obviously that knowledge has been built. They want to share it, and it's there's a lot of people wanting to learn about that on LinkedIn, so it's an easy path to follow.
Yeah.
But I can see why it'd be easy to slip down that route. But I noticed that also it's I guess the one downside, or one of the downsides of growing and having that bigger following, is that you then reach a bigger audience, which is great, more people to influence. But the side of social media that we know about, the negative side, can start to creep in. And I noticed you posted not that long ago about how you started, these more negative comments start to come in because you're reaching a bigger audience, and just by the rules of probability, you're going to end up with, I guess, expanding out of an echo chamber and then into the wider world, which is a great thing, because we don't want to just stick in our echo chambers and talk to people who agree all the time, which can happen on LinkedIn a bit. But how have you found that? It's obviously, it takes a lot to speak openly and be vulnerable on social media, but as soon as you start to reach out to a bigger audience and a few negative comments come in, I guess it can be hard not to focus just on those one or two comments and forget the thousands and thousands of good comments that you've had before.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, and it can really hit you mentally. And it has happened a couple of times with me, where I've put a few posts that maybe they were, a little bit more controversial than usual. And sometimes it's also interesting how the algorithm works,
Mm.
because sometimes you get a couple of people starting to comment negative things, and then a lot of people in their network see it, and because they maybe are like-minded, they will continue commenting. So I remember I had one post, and there were like around 200 comments, and around 90% of them were very negative.
Ouch.
So I spent like, reading 200 comments. It takes like a couple hours,
Yeah, a couple of hours of negative
and
comments.
responding to that. Yeah. So I was going through them, and man, when I finished that, I was so drained mentally. Like, it took so much energy out of me just reading those comments, like attacking me really badly. Saying that I should go to jail, that I wanted to do mass murder, things like, even if it's not true, it still affects you. And reading 200 of them, it kind of even makes you doubt whether they're right, because it's like there's so many of
Mm.
them agreeing. It's like, damn it, am I trying to destroy the world? Is that really true? Like, maybe I'm missing something here, really. So it's definitely something that's tricky when you grow in that sense. You reach so many people, and something we need to be mindful is that not everyone's going to agree with us, right? And unfortunately, there's good ways of disagreeing and not so good ways of
Mhm.
disagreeing, and some people would go for the latter. So that day, what I did was, like, after I finished that, I shut down the laptop and I just went off technology for a couple
Mm.
hours, because it really hit me mentally. And I was by myself that day. My girlfriend was not around. I remember when she came back, like, I shared with her, like, I was like really, really down. And yeah, it's you can't avoid it if you want to grow. I guess depending on your topic and your niche, maybe it's easier not to get so many of those.
Mm.
But something like climate change that unfortunately can be quite polarizing. And that particular post, I was attacking fossil fuel companies and I
Hmm.
was attacking capitalism. There's a little bit of chances that you're gonna get
Yeah.
backfire there. But yeah, it depends, right? Some days you feel like sharing what you feel like,
Yeah.
and you just need to be aware that yeah, it can backfire, and it's important for you to have resiliency tools within you. Like for example, I do a lot of meditation, breath work, yoga, and they really help me, bring back balance after those things happen. But yeah, they definitely can't happen if you
Mm.
start growing. Even if you have a small following, you can still get something like that happening. I get it from other people who share, like they've got maybe, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000 followers, and they still get
Yeah.
some heated up conversations. So yeah, it can happen to anyone when you start sharing your thoughts publicly,
Hmm.
and it's something that not everyone is comfortable with. But I think overall, when you weight everything, the outcome is really positive. It's just what you said, like try not to focus on that small percentage of people and comments that are negative, but realizing that the large majority are actually, positive and enjoying and thankful. So trying to focus on those, it's the key.
It's just human nature, isn't it, to focus on the two negative comments and then forget about the thousands and thousands of positive ones. But it's an interesting one when you link it back to the funnel that you were talking about earlier. And obviously, if you're posting on social media, you're talking to a wider audience. You're talking to the world effectively, or you could be. That post could find its way out to anyone. So it's a tricky one when you're thinking of the different point that people are at. You may have really, with that post, you may have been spot on with 90% of people who were at that point in your audience who agreed. But then there's the people at a different point in the funnel who weren't quite ready to meet at that point yet. And it's just an interesting thought, a wider thought around how we communicate. We don't shy away from the activism side of things and saying things that we're passionate about, but at the same time, being conscious of that longer game, that funnel, and accessing people at different points. It's a difficult one.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky because for me, for example, I try to make it one of my goals is to make social impact and sustainability accessible for more people in that sense. But yeah, sometimes you feel like you want to go a little bit deeper, right? And there's a difficulty in there because unfortunately you cannot pick who's going to see your post, right?
Mm.
So yeah, it's trying to make our best to keep it accessible and really tailored to that audience. But yeah, there's cases where you're gonna be talking the same message to different stages in the climate funnel. And yeah, it's not ideal, but it's part of the it's part of the game.
That is a social media game. And do you think that Good Ripple could replace LinkedIn at some point? Is that the is that the aim? Do you see them doing completely different
Yeah.
things?
No, yeah, no. I think we're definitely not competing with LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn, I mean, I'm thankful, super thankful for LinkedIn, for the platform they've created, and you can find a lot of change makers in there.
Mm.
I think LinkedIn is a sort of a complementary, Good Ripple is a complementary platform to
Mm.
LinkedIn, where you can just focus on change makers, on social impact, sustainability. There won't be any noise about other stuff in there, so you can focus about creating a better world. And also the main value proposition for Good Ripple is about having this map where you can easily find people, because
Hmm.
on LinkedIn at the moment it's quite hard to find people, right? Like yeah, you can go on the search bar and type impact entrepreneur, but it's going to be quite random what shows up in there.
Yeah.
So Good Ripple will replace a lot of that and make it a bit more about making those connections meaningfully. So yeah, I don't say it as a replacement, but they can work together pretty well.
You never know. One day when we all become change makers and we're all at that point, then it will
Well, maybe,
eventually
yeah.
step in and we'll all be on good Ripple and it'll be, but one step at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. Yeah, one day. Dream big.
Um, so yeah, thanks very much, Carlos. I've got a few last questions to get onto that I've been asking every guest. Just wanted to check there's nothing we haven't covered that you wanted to cover in this conversation before I move on to those last few.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so the first one I've been asking all my guests in this new series um, is to try and spread the ideas around to try and create a bit of a ripple effect, which you're so good at yourself. And it's what I've found with a lot of entrepreneurs that I've spoken to over the years is that they have lots of ideas. They tend to always have this relentless whether it's a curse or a good thing of coming up with ideas all the time and not being able to run with them all, and sometimes maybe running with multiple and eventually having to choose one that they're really passionate about and they put all their time and effort into. And so to try and spread the ideas out there and to hopefully get more to come into fruition, I've been asking guests if they've got any business ideas that they've had in the past that they've maybe jotted down on a piece of paper or in a notepad somewhere that they just haven't had chance to take action on, but are happy to share with the community that are listening in case there's someone that thinks, maybe I'll take that idea forward.
Yeah, definitely. There's one that clearly comes to mind, and it's something that I've been thinking of myself. It's actually not necessarily tailored to impact, but I think there's a big potential to make it niche into impact. And it's about helping people getting jobs. Because, I talk to a lot of people and I interview a lot of people for my various companies. And I see a recurring thing is that people don't really know very well how to apply for jobs. And there's a bigger issue around that. And it's like, we're not getting maybe a lot of people to work for a lot of necessary jobs. So I'm thinking of green jobs, for example, right? Jobs in the social impact and sustainability. We could be helping a lot of people to really get into that space. Because, from Good Ripple, for example, there's a lot of people who are trying to find jobs and they struggle. They struggle to make a transition from a normal to an impact job, or, they got made redundant and they really struggle to get a new job. And there's obviously many reasons that come into play. But from my experience, one that I see as a big market gap that, an entrepreneur could take in there is about helping people really make outstanding applications for jobs. Really simple things like when I do job posts, I normally put a, a trap question at the end to check whether people have actually read the job description. Because the job description, it's like one page. It takes like 2 minutes to read it, right? So at the end, for example, I would ask people to write me a cover letter starting with "Hello, alligator." So I know if they actually read the thing, or maybe on LinkedIn, for example, you can put questions. So one of the questions is, "What's your favorite number?" And in the job description, I say, when you are asked about your favorite number, say 963, for example. And you'll be surprised that only around 1 to 2% of people actually read the job description.
Wow.
And then you talk to people and I keep hearing, yeah, I didn't get the job. I don't get the job. I've been looking for jobs for so much time. I think, people are going into finding jobs and they just go apply, 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 apply. So like, yeah, you've applied to 100 of them, but like pretty poorly. So if you improve how you apply to jobs, it maybe just apply to 10, you've got a lot more chances to actually get one of those 10. So simple things like read the job description, the CV. There's a lot of improvements that could be done in how people create CVs. Like honestly, when you have like 100 CVs to review and you look at them, there's only maybe a couple of them that stand out in terms of, hey, this person thought about this and they want to make my life easy. So there's a huge potential there. to help people land jobs. And I think it can be easily be niched into impact. There's a more and more people now are finding that they want a meaningful job, and they're struggling to make that transition. So helping those people land their next impact job, I think that's a huge opportunity there. And I would love to do that, because I keep seeing it, and it's like I could really be helping these people make this a lot better. Things like just creating a cover letter, right? It's like when you study these things, like the basics, you apply, send the cover letter because it shows your interest, it shows you've put the effort. Still 98% of people do not send a cover letter. So simple things like that, I would love to see it, because even me hiring, I would love to have better options and see, all of these people are putting effort and energy into do this, right? And I think it would go back to people and getting a lot more jobs more easily, and ultimately, creating a better workforce overall for impact.
Love it. Well, if there's anyone out there that likes that idea and and wants to create something to help people improve in that area, then there's an idea for you all. The next one is around books, and what is on your bookshelf currently that you might want to recommend to listeners? It can be environmental related, or it can be completely unrelated. What's on your bookshelf at the moment, Carlos?
Yeah, so I wanted to share one that I actually just finished reading, and it's called A Gift for Conversation by Dr. Louise Keel. And it's a really small book. You can read it just probably like 2-3 hours. But it's basically empowering people to start those conversations about climate change. And it's super cool, because at the end of every chapter, it'll give you a few tips on how to start a conversation about those topics with people around you. So, it's meant to be super practical. So I'm now starting to put into practice those things. And yeah, I've learned a lot through it. It's very simple, it's very accessible to everyone, whether you are at the top of the funnel or at the bottom of the funnel. You can really read this book. It's super, super accessible. And yeah, I think it's back to what we were talking before, and again, what Catherine Hayhoe recommends, and talking more about climate change, even if you don't mention climate change as such, but to empower people to build motivation, start taking actions. It's really powerful. So I really recommend that book for everyone who's struggling to have those conversations, or who just want to level them up. It's really, really helpful. And it's also a book that's meant to be gifted to somebody.
Okay.
So we're getting into Christmas now. So think about maybe gifting a book to somebody else that maybe, they're starting to learn about climate change, or you see that maybe they want to start talking more about it. It's a really, really good book that you can give to people. I actually brought mine yesterday to I did the Climate Fresh workshop yesterday. I mentioned before, and I brought it there and I gifted it to somebody in there, with the only condition that when they finish, they have to give it to somebody else. So I like to create these ripples with the books as well.
Brilliant. It sounds like a really useful short. I love those short kind of actionable books that you can just give to someone, and it's like, don't worry, you're not handing them over a textbook on climate change and they're never going to read it. Just hand them a nice small actionable book. Sounds really good. I'll include that in the show notes. And the final one of the quick fire questions I've got is the billboard question. And if you could put a quote on a billboard in your nearest town, nearest big city, with a quote on it to get people to take action or to inspire action, what would that quote be?
I would put, "You have the power to change the world."
Nice.
Just like that. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
I think if people come to the point of that realization, because we tend to think that we're powerless, and I see a lot of people not taking action because of that, thinking, "Oh, what does it matter if I do this or if I do that, because the government or the companies or whatever." You have the power to change the world. It's really the missing piece in this puzzle is everyone realizing that we have the power. We just need to come together and join forces. That's really the key. So if people can remember that, I think that